Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Here we are on Torah T'mimah. So, we are, of course, talking about the promises and the relationship that
Do
what
we need to do the prayer?
we do. Thank you, David. You are clearly paying attention. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. So the last time we got into I hope, an interesting discussion about counting the Omer and the significance of the words and the letters, etc. But here we're going to come back to this particular passage, which we said we'd do. So I'm grateful that we can. So this is where we're at. The lo yiyeh. So this is the verse that we're talking about. It's let's find it. It's verse 15, as you can see. Here's the 15, right? And there's the 15. So this is God speaking to Noah and saying, V'zacharti et briti, I will remember my covenant, asher beini uveinechem, which is between me and you, uvein kol nefesh chaya, and between all living creatures, b'chol basar, of all flesh. V'lo yeh od hamayim, and there will no longer be water. Lemabul, as a flood, leshachet kol basar, to destroy all flesh. So let's take a look at this lovely analysis that we're going to see. V'lo yiyeh, etc. Right. So here we are. Amar Rabbi Elazar, said Rabbi Elazar, love when you say no, when you use the word no in a sentence such as this one, where you say there will no longer be, right? Shvu'ah. It's taking an oath. You're making an oath that by saying no here, God was making an oath to the humanity. Dichtiv, how do we know? Velo yeh od hamayim lamabul, because here it says, there shall no longer be water for a flood. Uchativ, and elsewhere in Isaiah chapter 54, it says, Ki mei Noach zot li, for this is to me, in other words, what God is promising to the Jewish people at this point in this prophecy of Isaiah, and it's a prophecy of consolation that basically God will never ever abandon the Jewish people totally, and etc. And he's comparing it to the waters of Noah and the promise that God made to humanity at that time. So it is as the waters of Noah to me, asher nishbati. And that sentence goes on to say, which I swore. So that's how we know. Even though it doesn't say here, I swear, right? There in Isaiah, it says it. And so what was it in this particular statement that in Noah here that indicates that it's taking an oath? And that's this love. This is saying never, never, never. Amar Rava. So Rava, a later Talmudic authority, a major player, okay, said, Vahu provided to Amar Lav Trezimne, as long as you say no, no twice. Not just once. Once could just simply be a statement. But when you say no, no twice, that makes it into a vow, into an oath. Dichtiv, and he points out in Pasuk Yud Aleph, back in verse 11, and we'll take a careful look at it as soon as we do it. Belo yikaret kol basar od mimei hamabul. No longer will flesh be cut off through the waters of a flood. Velo yeh od hamayim lamabul. And in our verse where it says, and let me make sure I've got the right one, right? Yeah. Velo yeh od hamayim lamabul, and water shall no longer constitute a flood to destroy people. So let's take a look at destroy the earth. Here's the verse, the first verse, verse 11. It says, V'hakimoti et briti itchem, I shall establish my covenant with you, V'lo yikaret, there is, v'lo yikaret kol basar od mimei hamabul, and no longer shall flesh be cut off from the waters of the flood. And then it goes on to say, this, okay, v'lo yeh od mabul l'shachet haaretz, and no longer will there be a flood to destroy the earth. And we are going to look very carefully at the language, right? And this is a really very cool comment on the part of the notes of Torah T'mimah. Mefaresh b'Gemara goes on to say, he says, that it's stated in the Gemara, Dehu Hadin, that all the more so are you taking a vow. We should understand, Hain is the word yes, indeed, Nami Shvuah. It is also the verbiage of an oath. It's the expression of an oath. Disvarahi, because you can conclude logically. Midalav Shvuah, if saying no is the wording or the expression of an oath, Hein Nami Shvuah, saying indeed, yes, right? If no is an expression of an oath, then certainly yes, I affirm, right? I affirm is also taking an oath. V'lachen gam behain, and likewise, when it comes to the expression of the word hein, I affirm, indeed, yes, tzarich shiomar trei zimnei. So likewise, in that case, it has to be stated twice. Mentioning it twice is what turns it into an oath. Now we go on a sleigh ride. V'habach, and the Bach. And in a previous session, I talked about the Bach, and I had to correct myself. And this time I did some research, right? So here we are, up here. The Bach was Rabbi Joel Sirkis. That was the name of the author. And he is named by his work very often. In religious writing, a person is known by their major work. In fact, we sometimes refer to Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein as the Torah T'mimah. We refer to him as the Torah T'mimah. Right? So likewise, the Bach, the Beit Chet, stands for Bayit Chadash. That was the name of his book, right? He lived in Central Europe. He was the chief rabbi of in the course of his life, of a number of communities. He lived from 1561 to 1640. And he was a major commentary. He wrote a major commentary on the Arba'a Turim that he called Bayit Chadash. And the Arba'a Turim is also known as the Tur. It was written by Jacob ben Asher and is a precursor of the Shulchan Aruch. And it is organized the way so it's clearly a major practical halachic work, you could say, right? It's a major work on practical halacha and the various elements of Jewish practice. And it is organized, the way in which it's organized, it's called the Arba'a Turim, the four pillars, in the same way, because it deals, the way the subject matter is broken down is into four major areas. And it turns out that the Shulchan Aruch is also organized in exactly the same way. So, and of course, the Shulchan Aruch was written by Joseph Caro, and Joseph Caro also wrote a major commentary on the Arba'a Turim. So, the Bach is also a major commentary on the Arba'a Turim, and where you get to see him quite often is in the Talmud, the editions of the Babylonian Talmud, where he is footnoted on the side of the page, and there he adds glosses for textual emendations on the Talmud and on Rashi. And they're known as Hagahot Habach. That's what they're known as. However, I think here, let's see, I think right here, when the Torah T'mimah is referring to the Bach, and since he is referring to a passage in the Talmud, right? This is Shavuot, page 36a. Must be You see, he says he giha, right? So in other words, he notes, he makes this emendation on the Talmudic text. So the Talmudic text reads pretty much the way we just read up here, but this is what the Bach says. Baha she'amar, right? So we're quoting the Bach now. In that he said, right, sorry, let me see if I can read it. Right. So I think this is just simply saying Bahasha Amar is not necessarily a quote, but here we are. Vahu de Amar, right? In the fact that he said, and here we're going here. This is the area that the Bach is commenting on here. Okay. So he says, so instead of he says Vahu de Amar. So he says, see, it says Vahu de Amar, and he says Baha She'amar, right? Lav tre zimne. That it says lav tre zimne. So here he's making a slight emendation here, but let's keep going on, okay? He makes a major change, right? Let's see. Sorry, right here. Okay, here we go. Dinir Eli, right? This is the Bach saying, it seems to me, dichtiv velo yikaret kol basar od mimei hamabul. The reason he's saying the love is because it says lo yikaret kol basar mimei hamabul. Where is that? Right? Let's make sure we find it. Okay. It's right here in the verse 11 here. Let's make sure we find it. Here we go. Velo yikaret kol. Here it is. Make sure. Lo yikaret kol basar od mimei hababul, v'lo yeh od mabul l'shachet haaretz. Let me make sure I'm getting this correct. It's hard to sort of run up and down, right? Let's see. Right. Lo yikaret kol basar od mimei hababul, v'lo yeh od mabul l'shachet haaretz. So that's that verse, right? That's verse 11, right? Uchtiv, and it also says, v'lo yeh od hamayim lamabul, and no longer will there be water as a flood. Now, we pointed this out before. In verse 11, right? So he quotes verse 11, right? Lo yikare kol basar mimei hamabul, v'lo yeh od mimul l'shachet haaretz. And notice here it says v'lo here, and in the same verse it goes on to say v'lo here, right? And then here it says v'lo another time, v'lo yeh od hamayim lamabul. We said that was a verse that they were taking into account to get two loves. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out there aren't two loves, there are three loves. Right. So let's take a look at this, right? Make sure, all right. Finding the place. All right. Here we go. Ulichora. And on the surface, it appears Haga zo, that this particular note he's making, tamua ma'od, it's amazing. Why? Because according to this, shlosha lavin nimru bazeh. So the proof is you have to say lav lu twice, and guess what? We've got three, right? In the proof text itself, we wind up with three. Aval. However, be'emet, in actual fact, tov dam b'gaha zo. And actually, there's good sense, there's good logic, there's good reasoning in this particular note of the Bach. So he's coming to support the Bach and analyze why the Bach makes the comment, and it's correct. We're only talking about two loves, ultimately. Why? Ki lechoora kasher, because there is a problem. If you look again, there appears to be a problem. Demikodem, that initially, kishamar lav shvuah, that when he said love is the statement of love, of no, is in fact announcing a vow, making a vow. Hevi hapasuk, he used the verse v'lo yeh od hamayim lamabul. He used that verse that says, and there will no longer be water as a flood. So that's right. Let's make sure we've got the right place. Let's see. V'lo yeh od hamayim lamabul. That's this verse here, right there. And he used it, right? Okay. Shehu pasuk tetvav, which is, of course, verse 15. V'lama lo hevi hamukdam b'pasuk. And the question now is, right, if we look up here with Rabbi Elazar, right, he quotes V'lo yeh od hamayim lamabul. He's quoting verse 15. But the fact is he's going to be using verse 11 as well. So why doesn't he quote verse 11 first? Why does he quote verse 15 first? So, all right. So here we go. V'lama lo hevi hamukdam b'pasuk. Why didn't he bring the earlier verse in verse 11? V'lo yikaret kol basar od mimei hamabul, and all flesh will no longer be cut off from the waters of the flood. Venir Eli, why not? Venir Eli, it appears to me, the hapasuk, that verse, v'lo yikaret kol basar, that starts off which says, and all flesh will not be cut off. Eno more behechreach. It doesn't actually for sure say shelo yeh mabul, that there won't be a flood. That verse isn't saying there'll never be a flood, which is the vow, right? It's simply saying rak shelo yikaret adam mipnei hamabul. It's only saying that all flesh will not be cut off from a flood. Im yeh, if in fact there is a flood. So it's not promising that there won't be a flood. It's only promising that humanity won't be destroyed by a flood. V'lachein, and for this reason, hevi mi pasuk, and for he quotes the verse, v'lo yeh od hamayim lamabul, the verse that says, and there will no longer be water as a flood. Shelo yeh, that is to say, shelo yeh klal mabul, that is the part that says there will never be a flood. Period. Not so much the issue of all mankind. That is the kind of mabul that would wipe out people. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at this verse, right? So that's the point here. So here we go. V'lo yikaret kol basar od mimei hamabul is saying that if there is a great flood, right, all flesh will not be wiped out. And here we go, v'lo yeh od mabul. Here he says explicitly, there will no longer be a flood, l'shachet haaretz, to destroy the earth. There it is. So he's saying essentially that this v'lo doesn't count, because it's not talking about never having a flood. It's talking about all flesh not being cut off. However, this v'lo says explicitly there will no longer ever be a flood to destroy the earth. And of course, right here it says again, v'lo yeh od hamayim. There it says, and no longer will the waters do that, etc. Okay, so let's finish this up. Okay. V'lachen, and for this reason, keshemevi hechreach, right? When he's talking about the necessity, denafkale shnei lavim, where he says you have to have twice the statement no, you have to put no twice into the statement. Ein raya od min velo yikaret. You can't use that part of the statement that refers to never will be cut off. That law, that love, cannot be used. Kemoshe katavnu, just as we explained, because it wasn't talking about a mabul. It was talking about all flesh being cut off. V'al korchacha, and so perforce. Haraya min velo yeh od mabul. That verse, that the proof from the verse that says velo yeh od mabul, right? There will no longer be a flood. V'hevi hapasuk velo yikaret, right? And there in the original text it says velo yikaret. There it says he's quoting that flesh will not be cut off. Rak mishum, it's only because the tchilat hapasuk hadarush. It's only because he's referring to the beginning of the verse. The rest of the verse is what proves the point. And the reason he's quoting that verse isn't for those words themselves, but rather as indicating what verse he's referring to. Umin velo yeh od hamayim, and from this going on to saying, and no longer will there be water, going on, lamabul, to act as a flood, etc. V'yiyin barif, he goes on to say, and look at the Rif. The Rif is Isaac of Fez, known as Alfasi. He was one of the very earliest halachists. He was one of the earliest commentators to look at the Talmud and derive halacha from the Talmud, because the Talmud text doesn't simply state halacha. It states many discussions. It also has agadic material, and Berif basically extracted the halachic material with additional notes of his in his commentary on the Talmud. It is included in certain editions of the Vilna Shas, of the Vilna edition of the Talmud, in the back, where it is he and other commentators on the Rif himself are mentioned. So, Shegir Sato, so he says the version of this statement in Alfasi, in the Rif, right? Mekuvenet lahagaat habach. It's stated in the same way as the Bach's notes. It is set up in such a way, just as the Bach noted. So, uh, so we can go quickly to the next passage. All right, and here we go. It's a sweet passage. I think we took care of this page entirely. There we go. So let's take a look at this one here. So this is verse 20. We'll take a look at the verse. Let's take a look. We've got here about the rainbow here, etc., right? That's a sign of the covenant, etc., etc. So let's take a look here. So this is verse 20 down here. Right. Well, I can start here. Vayu v'nei Noach hayotzim min hateva, those descendants of the children of Noah, the sons of Noah, who went out from the ark, Shem, v'Cham, v'Yafet, their names, Shem, Ham, and Yafet. V'Cham hu avi Canaan, and Cham is the ancestor of Canaan, of Cain. And so we're going to get into a new story here about how Noah became drunk. Right, and that's, if you're familiar with that story. Shlosha ele b'nei Noach. These three were the sons of Noah. Ume'ela nafza kol ha'aretz, and from them the whole earth spread out. And now we get into the narrative. Vayachel Noach ish ha'adamah. So Noah, the man of the earth, began. Right, he began. Vayita harem, and he planted a vineyard. That's what he began with. I think what it's trying to say is that one of the first things he did was to plant a vineyard. Of course, I'll read the next verse simply to conclude the idea. Vayesht min hayayin, and he drank of the wine. Vayishkar, and he became drunk. Vayitgal betoch oholo, and he exposed himself. He became exposed in his tent, inside his tent. Okay. The story, I can tell you in general, is in some ways, I think, to justify the possession of the land of Canaan by the Israelites. And even if it is not a compelling argument, but the very fact that the Torah has a need to justify the expulsion of the Canaanites, or the destruction of the Canaanites, so that the Jewish people could enter the land of Canaan, is remarkable. That it is not assumed that that is just a gimme. And as I said, one can certainly discuss these issues, and clearly there are other issues that are of concern regarding the morality, the ethics of this. But here we have in the story that implied question, and the way in which the Torah tries to solve it in this particular story. All right, let's take a look at this here. Here we go. Vayechal Noach, right? Noah began, etc. Darash over Galilah, someone who was passing through Galilee. I didn't see any notes on this, but that is an interesting reference. Who are they talking about? Normally, it says Darash Rabbi so-and-so, right? It usually, or somebody's name, and here the name is not given, and it's somebody who passed through Galilee. That's how we know who this was. Yud Gimel Vavin Nimru Bayayin. There are 13 Vavs, right? The letter Vav mentioned regarding uh, in wine, regarding wine. And the letter Vav can also stand, I think the Torah T'mimah is going to explain this, for vai, meaning woe. In other words, the implication that 13 times woe is mentioned with regards to wine. And here he gives them. These are verbs that come up in the story as we go. The very first one, vayachel, he began, right? Also, by the way, this word is sometimes can mean, it means to begin, vatchila, right? But it also can come to the word meaning profane, that Noah profaned himself. Okay. Vayita, he planted. There's the vav, the vai. Look at these. Vai, vayasht, he drank. Vayishkar, there's a vai, he became drunk. Vayitkal, he exposed himself. Vayar, this has to do with Canaan, seeing him, right? Vayar, he saw. Vayaged, and he told. Vayikach, this is where the other brothers took, right? A cloak to cover him. Vayasimu, and they placed. Vayelchu, and they went. They went backwards so that they didn't look at where he was exposed. Vayechasu, and they covered. Right, they covered. Vayikatz, again. Look at these vais. Right, he awoke. Vayeda, and he realized. Okay, so let's go. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. All these vav yuds. So let's stop here, and we will take a look next time at the Torah T'mimah on this. So let me mark the place. Give me one moment and I'll do this. Okay, right there. And I'm going to stop the share. So, any thoughts, any comments before I stop the recording? Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. Hi, good morning.
So now I'm interested in that. What's the cause of? I mean, what's the reason for the Canaanites being expelled?
Oh, well, Canaan was the ancestor of the Canaanites. Okay. And basically he was cursed by Noah for there are midrashim, which we will get into, that basically he was the son of Ham, and essentially when he told, they were thinking possibly of castrating him so that he wouldn't have any, that is Noah, so that he wouldn't have any more children. That's a midrash. That's not explicitly stated in the Torah. There are two versions of the story that essentially that they desired to make sure that Noah did not have any more children so that they wouldn't have to divide the inheritance any further. So basically, there is this terrible act on the part of Canaan, okay, that got this all started. And that's, in a sense, a punishment. What is terrible about this is the idea that the statement that the fathers, let's see, the fathers have eaten sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. And that is that the descendants of Canaan should be punished for this, for a sin that their ancestor committed. But the truth is, from a literary point of view, it's trying to suggest that this was part of, to speak in modern terms, that this was part of their DNA, that they were basically, could I say, absolutely, they were wicked in their culture, etc. And not to say they were being punished because of their ancestor, but that they continued these behaviors, and this was typical of their society, that their society was wicked inside and out. As a result, they were kicked out of the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, because that is a very holy area. And what's most important is that if the Jewish people were to behave in the same way, guess what would happen? They would be exiled as well, which of course history proved. The difference is that because of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the relationship they'd had with God, that God promised he would never abandon the Jewish people, that he would never totally abandon the Jewish people. Yes, they would have to face the consequences of their behavior, but God would never completely abandon them. So that's, I'm sorry?
Are the Canaanites part of the Ishmael DNA?
No, not at all. No, no. Ishmael is a Semite. Ishmael is a son of Abraham. He is a cousin of ours. Yeah, no. So there are no Canaanites around anymore.
The Canaanites are part of the Abrahamic people.
No, they're not. That's my point. The
Okay.
ancestor of Abraham is Shem. Okay, Shem. The ancestor of the Canaanites is Ham, Shem's brother. Okay? No,
Okay, so Palestinians
okay. Go ahead.
Palestinians claiming they're Canaanite.
No, they're not. No.
That would mean that they're not Abrahamic.
They wouldn't do that. They're Muslims. Arabs are descendants of Ishmael. I know of no Arab who doesn't claim that Arabs aren't descended from Ishmael. And they claim Abraham as their great ancestor too. They do. In fact, I heard a Muslim say the very first Muslim was Abraham.
Right. So no Palestinians would ever say they're the ancient Canaanites.
No, they would not. They would not.
Okay.
That's not the argument. In fact, that would make it difficult for them to, lay claim to Israel, especially as religious people, as religious believers. Okay.
So no American Palestinian could say that either. Palestinian supporter.
They only ignorant ones.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, my feeling is that again, I feel that Palestinians also have claim to this territory, and that it's a matter of trying to share it in a legitimate way, and so that there is peace and prosperity amongst all. Okay, but look, we don't have time to go into all the subtleties. I mean, it would take years, an entire course to go through the history and to go through the various attempts to solve the problem, etc. That's beyond the reaches of our class. So, but I appreciate the question. So I'm going to sign off. Take care. Good to have you all. God willing, tomorrow we'll be into numbers. Take care.